Okay, cool. Riki, so, anyone takes a scroll through your Instagram, it's the first thing you see is some pretty crazy moves and pretty crazy positions and lifting things that you've done. How did this all begin for you?
I started training when I was 7 years old in judo and jiu-jitsu. I think I probably had ADHD as a child, but I was never diagnosed with it. I think it's something, we're all on a scale, aren't we? So I needed something to put my mind and body into. So my dad put me into that. And then since then, I've just been doing lots of different martial arts. So Wing Chun, boxing, wrestling. And then I started to do the calisthenics, yoga, and then mobility, rehab science. More recently, last 5 years, doing sort of weapon stuff, which is just martial arts with a weapon is just an extension of your body, really. So, yeah, it's just been lifting as well. I mean, I think everybody tries lifting in the gym when they try to use dumbbells and weights. But when I say lifting, I mean Olympic lifting. So snatches and cleans and heavy squats and things like that, heavy deadlifts. So I've been doing that more in the last few years.
Yes, some of the things you do, they're not things that you can just sort of like pick up tomorrow, or you have to. There is quite a learning curve to it. Or how did you approach like the specialism element to it? And did you have periods where you sort of really dived into one goal and then moved on? And how did you approach that? Because let's say for someone wanting to accomplish, I don't know, an L-sit muscle up that you've got a world record for, that you don't just there's an element of progression that leads to it. So how did that sort of unfold?
Yeah, we just used to try it in the park. I remember seeing someone do a flag, which is where you hold your body sideways like this.
Yeah.
And your body's just parallel like this. And then I saw it, so I just went into the park and tried it on a goalpost. And I could do it straight away, but very badly. It didn't look good at all. But it was still hard to hold yourself up, right? I remember putting this picture of me doing it on Facebook, probably like 12, 13 years ago. And a few people, some of my friends from uni or back then, they were putting things like, oh, that's Photoshop. And it wound me up a bit because I was like, no, I actually did do that. Even if it doesn't look what I wanted it to, I did do that. So then the very next day, I went out back into the park just to take a video of me doing it to prove that I was actually doing it. It wasn't a flash picture or a Photoshop. And then from that moment, I just wanted to carry on learning all the different types of moves and skills, if you like. But one thing started happening, with this Instagram explosion, I guess, that happened around 10 years ago. When I first got onto, I was a little bit late to it. I was a few years late to get on it. But when I got on there, nobody was really doing calisthenics. It was still about pictures. But you could just about start putting videos on. So I think when I started, you couldn't put videos. But then they introduced it quite quickly. And when I started putting videos of what I was doing, I got loads of followers really quickly because that content wasn't available on the platform for many people. So I just got in there quite quickly. But then I noticed, because it was still a big focus of Instagram was pictures and not so much videos, people used to use this thing called, I think it was called Vine for videos.
Okay, I've not heard of that. No.
But there was just old apps, like YouTube and whatever else. People didn't use Instagram for videos, really. But for a while, it was more based around photos. And what people used to do was put up snapshots of them holding static positions, which I knew from looking at the pictures that they definitely didn't hold. There's little clues that you can see. So, for instance, when someone's feet are blurred, but the rest of their body is still, you know that their feet weren't still in that picture because they're blurry. Because when you've done it and you've tried to take a picture of you holding the position, if you've been moving or you failed it, you'll see your feet blur, but everything else still. So you know what is real and what isn't. Or if you look at the angle of someone's shoulders and arms when they're doing certain positions that counterbalance parts of the body. You can see physics-wise that the structure they presented in the picture is not real. You know what I mean? So if you're doing like a planche, which is a plank with no hands, with no legs, sorry, right? You have to lean forward over your hands to counterbalance your feet. There was this guy called Danny Cavaglo, who's made a load of money doing workshops around the world called Dragon's Door or something. And he used to put pictures up of him holding literally what looks like a right-angled plank like this with your hands like this.
It's impossible.
Floor, right? You know what I'm talking about? His hands were literally like this at a right angle, and his legs were up like this. And he put this up on his promotional pictures for his workshop. And I looked at it and I was like, I've been doing this 3 years and I still can't do that. And you've come out of nowhere with a picture, and people don't know the difference between what that move actually is and isn't. You're just selling a fraudulent thing, but you're actually getting to travel the world selling workshops on the back of it. And who knows if he can do it now or not. I'd hope he can after 10 years of practice, but a lot of people just get by on scamming the public like that. So it was just interesting to see how there was this very competitive stage of Instagram where there was a lot of fraudulent behavior going on, people just scamming people with content that wasn't real. So Ivan, you'll know this, when people take flash snaps of one-arm handstands.
That's exactly what I was thinking. This whole time I've been thinking about that, because I train at a gym. I don't know if you've heard of Movement Co. It's like one of the biggest handstand gyms in Australia, and they're very strict and adamant about handstands here. Like, pictures don't count for shit. You know, you need to be able to hold a one arm for like 10 seconds on video to actually claim a one arm. But that's exactly what I was thinking in my mind when you were talking about all this stuff, because I've seen it too. People, putting up pictures, even if it's, this is not just planches, this is levers, this is, cross, whatever it is. It's like, it's just a picture. A picture means nothing in the Cali world, in my opinion. I need to see a video, need to make sure it's real and authentic, and then I might believe it.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just that's what I mean when I say I get political sometimes, because fine, it's all fun and games and we're all just doing a sport and who cares what anyone else does and blah blah blah. But if you go really deep on it, if you actually care and you have passion about it, and this is your life, like us, where we study it and we do it and we teach it, it's actually very offensive to the public to trick them into thinking you've done something by taking a picture. It also brushes under the carpet all the hard work that the people that can actually do it have done. And it's just 100%. a real mockery of the whole industry and the skill. And it also makes people have false expectations of how quickly they can get. It's just absolutely wrong on many moral levels.
I know.
Yeah. But people will look at it and say, well, if there's just a picture, what's your problem? And it's like, no, you don't understand that's damaging.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've probably seen this too on YouTube, those videos. Get your planche in 30 days. Get your splits in 30 days. Yeah. All that bullshit as well. And but that's again that gets clicks. And as you said, it's really interesting that if it gives people false expectations. And it's very similar into the whole transformation world. People think that they can get into the shape of their life within a couple months, and that's it. It's still, even the Cali world, the gymnastics world is still feeding that instant gratification, because to be fair, nothing has been more humbling in my life at the moment than training for an Iron Cross. It's taken me 5 years to get to where I am now. Like, I'm close, but I'm still a good 6-7 months away, I would say. But it's, when I first walked into the gym saying I wanted to do it, they were like, this is going to take you a fucking long time. Are you happy to commit to that? And I was, I actually enjoyed the journey of learning all this stuff. You know what I mean? It's actually been fantastic being a beginner. And, I'm sure we'll talk about this later on, but the lessons you learn in the Cali world, the flexibility world, the gymnastics world, man, it is the most humbling thing in the world. Like, if you do it properly, and it carries over to many other facets of life.
Yeah, 100%.
But with this, you get that instant gratification element where people will kind of go through their fitness journey and suddenly say, all right, I want to do calisthenics now. I want to start doing handstands. Now, we know it's a long-term journey, but are there some initial steps you need to be prepared to do something like this? what is some of the like physical preparation you need to go through in order to start that calisthenics journey?
Well, calisthenics is just body weight strength. So you have to build a foundation of strength, doing basic things. There's pull-ups and push-ups and whatever else. But in all my time teaching it, I'll tell you that most people don't have what it takes to get good at it, because it hurts. It hurts
100%.
to train. It's pain. It's not easy. Even if you just do pull-ups all session, it hurts. And your grip starts to hurt. You get calluses on your hands and stuff. Like, I can't even show you mine, but when I grab this skin here, I don't feel anything. It's dead. Look, it's like this thick. It's this thick and it's dead. There's no feeling there. So like, but before, for the first couple of years, it used to hurt all the time. Just when you grab the bar.
False
yeah, the false grip as well. Yeah. So even I've got this tattoo here, and there was this one started to fade a bit when I was really doing the rings a lot because of the calluses.
Yeah,
there's a bit of a callus in there. See that?
Yeah.
So that's from rings, basically.
Yeah,
so like, it's just but your skin does heal over time when you stop doing it. I tore my bicep around 4 months ago, which is what this scar is from the surgery.
How did you do that? What were you doing in that regard?
The ring slipped on the tree when I was doing Skin the Cat, and it just popped the bicep, but it didn't hurt.
Whoa.
It just felt weird. The whole thing came off the bone, and they had to drill a hole in my bone and reattach it and blah, blah, blah. So I haven't actually done anything properly on the rings for 4 months, but I've just started getting back onto them. And a lot of movements you don't need your bicep for, even a front lever, to be honest. You don't really need it.
No.
So because you're like this. Yeah, so it's scaps and everything else. So I can still do a lot of the strength stuff. But certain things like planche and straight arm presses and a lot of straight arm stuff is hard to do because you need your bicep to eccentrically control what's happening. So I need to train that back. But for some reason it comes back so much easier and quicker than when you first learn it.
Yeah.
Like there was a few weeks where I felt like I could load my arm enough to do a straight arm press, but I couldn't find the power or strength to do it. And then 2 weeks later, I didn't do it again. So I tried it on the parallel bars. I got on there. I did an L-sit, and I started lifting. And I was like, oh, I can't get the strength out of my arms. And then I just left it, carried on with my squats and whatever else for 2 weeks. Then I came back to it, and it just happened all the way up. And I was like, oh, right, I've got it back then. Do you know what I mean? So it's like I didn't even have to work for it. I think it just takes time for your body to heal.
Yeah, but the motor pattern, once it's been established, can hang around for a long time. And that's really cool about the Cali stuff. A lot of the skills take you a long time to learn, but once you get it, like I've seen people at the gym once they get their first muscle up, you know, the journey to their first muscle up. I see so many people get so pumped, they get so excited, and then literally the next day they can do doubles. You know what I mean?
What you said is really important about the motor paths and the neurological sequence of firing and the patterns. Because if you learn a muscle up in a faulty way by doing faulty reps on the way up, what you actually establish as a pattern is incorrect, even if you get up there. And then when you try to clean it up afterwards, you have to undo a faulty pattern and create a new one. So it's always, in my opinion, better to make it absolutely clean from the start, which is why we should use more resistance bands and regressions instead of just trying to do. So like Akash, he said, what can you do to prep to start to do these things? That's very important, because if you don't prep correctly, you'll do what most of us, well, at least what we did, because we didn't have any teachers. Nobody could do this stuff except for professional gymnasts, and nobody would teach us or knew how to teach us how to do it. So we were in the park, and I started in my 20s. So I could train every day and come back the next day. Now I'm 37. I can't do that. Like I need my rest, a day of rest, if I've had a really hard day of training. but I still train for 3 or 4 hours, and I don't. You know what I mean? So that has built up for a long time, the endurance. But when you start, you're just trying to hold yourself in these positions, and you don't even know how they work. So I don't even know how we figured it all out. We were just like constantly doing it and sharing with each other. And the community arose out of that. There's like an underground scene, like in skateboarding or something else. And now you'll have a whole load of people that can give you their personal advice on how to achieve something. But something is still lacking in the calisthenics industry, which is sports science verified techniques.
Proper coaching, proper strength development.
It's not that it doesn't exist. I'm writing some books at the moment and stuff on it, which is kind of like a life project for me. When I finish it, that will be kind of me retiring from Cali, because I can't die and not give this information to other people if I have it, especially if it's not being shared in any other place. But most of the time, if you go on YouTube, there'll be, here's a step-by-step program for how to do a planche or a muscle up, and it will contain the same techniques and moves that everybody else gives. They're all the basic progressions, and then it will have a little bit of insight from that particular person that you might not have heard from someone else. But there is no comprehensive guide for how any individual starting from scratch can achieve this from scratch with everything included, not just the strength stuff, but the mobility and everything else. And that's because the people that can do these things are not qualified to teach the whole, in general, are not qualified to teach the whole range of things needed to get good at these things. So when I first learned certain moves like planche, my shoulders were not equal. And even if it's subtly like this, you can't barely see it. But if you do a cross like this,
it shows up. Yeah,
it shows up after time, especially in the format of pain. In the format of pain,
yeah.
You start getting a lot of pain because you're putting your joints through a lot of force, but they're not. The structural integrity is not there to protect you. So you've got flaws and dysfunctions in your joints. And this is what made me start learning about mobility and rehab, and eventually go on to teach courses to therapists and stuff in it, because I could do all the stuff for about 4 or 5 years. I pretty much learned everything that you could do in calisthenics within 5 years. And then I had pains all over. And nothing was how I wanted it. It wasn't as clean as I'd like it. And then I fixed my mobility and started to do a lot more yoga and stretching, and learned about the importance of range of motion and how that creates efficiency in power and strength and movement and other things. And then I had to relearn the moves because I'd been doing so much stretching and mobility work that I'd lost the tensile strength that was in the muscles. But then the motor paths were there to give it back to me quickly, but I had to still redefine them in a certain way because I was balancing different. And that cycle has happened about 3 times in the last 12 years. So now when I jump up into a handstand, everything is, I wouldn't say perfectly straight, but everything is straight. And it doesn't feel like effort to balance. But when I first learned it, I was constantly having to compensate and adjust my line while I'm in a handstand, which made the handstand feel like constant effort. And now it just feels like I can do it until my fingers and wrists get tired, basically.
It's a rest position now. That's the way it should be.
It's a rest position, that's it. And so until your fingers and wrists get tired of supporting, or your shoulders, until you burn out, I can stay there. But before, it was like constantly managing, balancing. But there's nothing to balance. There's nothing to manage or balance when you're aligned correctly. And that alignment can only come out of good mobility and bodily awareness and micro adjustments of what's happening in your body. You know? So all of that stuff, that sort of rewinding back to your question, Akash, is that what's more important is to have good control of your nervous system and your joints. And that goes for any sport. But calisthenics is actually just a strength sport that doesn't use weight. So I compared it like this. Lifting is moving a bar around your body or a weight around your body. And calisthenics is moving your body around a bar or a weight. So it's just the opposite thing. What happens when you move weights around your body is your muscles need to get bigger because you're handling mass that's not attached to you. Does that make sense? So like if I'm lifting something away from me, if you don't tend to use completely straight joints when you do those things, you tend to use the levers of the body to create power.
Yeah, on that, Ricky, I think straight arm strength is just a completely foreign concept to many people who've just been doing a lot of gym stuff. You know, that's
except for functional fitness. So you got strongmen, kettlebell stuff, Olympic lifts. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. So when you do snatch, when you do windmills with kettlebells, all these kinds of things, that even maces and stuff like that. A lot of functional stuff has it in, but general gym is, in my opinion, is useless. Just doing weights in a gym, dumbbells and stuff like that, it's absolutely useless. It's only going to give you mass and strength, but I mean, by itself, it's useless because it doesn't correlate to any function. Isolating muscles doesn't teach them anything. It just gives them individual strength. But you have to train patterns in order to become good at something.
Correct. And in this sort of specific context, I find barbell dumbbell exercises can still be a nice adjunct to an overall program to potentially strengthen up sort of weak areas. So things like, the rotator cuff, I think, can benefit from weights and barbells and dumbbells when done properly. But I don't know what you mean. You need a mixture of both. You can't just expect to do, like I've seen people who can overhead press really heavy weights in our gym, can't hold a handstand for longer than a couple of seconds, right? or they can't do handstand push-ups to save their life. You know what I mean? And vice versa. I've seen people do handstand push-ups extremely well, but then when they try a barbell press, yes, the carryover is a little bit better, but they still struggle with that movement pattern because it's just not the same.
Yeah. Well, because they're also not compound and open chain. You know what I mean? So that's the thing. It's like I agree. Like you said, supplementing whatever function you have with weights is a good idea. So if you need external rotation in one arm and whatever else, but I consider that therapy and mobility. As I don't consider it working out. I consider it something you're doing to supplement what you actually do. But if you just do the thing for its own sake, it doesn't mean anything. Because then you're just going to come around the corner and say, hey, let me impress you with my external rotation strength in my arm. And I'd be like, okay, do that while you're holding your body in the air. Oh, you can't because you don't know how to connect your body together and make your strength work from your foot upwards. So therefore, you can't use it in any real situation except for in a situation that isolates that area. And nothing isolates anything. Even if you watch arm wrestlers, arm wrestling looks like an isolation of the arm, but it's not. You've seen what they do, the way they move. It's actually more to do with your lats and your pecs because they're drawing into the body like this. It's all to do with the torso, and the arm is just supposed to be locked. So it has to be isometrically strong, but there's not much rotational strength that happens here. It's the body that does that. So, it's like,
So just to bring it like sort of back to practicality for the everyday person, where for them, like again, I appreciate what you guys are both talking about is like,
it was rambling. Yeah.
But the majority of listeners, the majority of the general population, the appeal of learning a planche isn't probably there. But there is some applications of what you guys are saying here with regards to having more functional fitness or quote unquote functional fitness, a more applicable sort of day-to-day strength. What is the first step? Like, let's say you're someone who's using dumbbells, barbells, machine work right now. You've gotten yourself into shape. You're reasonably strong from a gym perspective. And you now want to explore and make yourself more well-rounded. Where do you first start? Is it mobility? Is it stretching? Is it doing some other things? How does that journey begin? Because I think that would be really useful for the listeners here.
I'm going to try and take because for you to ask that question, there's a few assumptions in there about what the person wants. And I'd kind of like to answer it by rewind or sort of expanding out of that question a bit.
Yeah.
The first thing someone needs to do is figure out what it means in their life to have good control and strength in their body. Like, what do they need it for? And so if you do it for your job, if you're a scaffolder or something.
Should I create some assumptions for your?
No. I'm getting there. I'm just where you answered the question at this level. I'm going to come in from here and then go through it. So basically, I'm just going to come from behind it. So rather than assuming somebody just wants to, or somebody is in a good position from the gym and then wants to go forward from there, I'm actually saying the person should first ask, what is my relationship with my body, and what do I need from my body, and what do I want from it in this lifetime that I have in it? And then if you're a person that is an artist and you have no inclination towards gym, I have nothing to say to you about why you should do calisthenics. There's absolutely no reason why you should. Absolutely nothing. Like, I would say to you, just do the minimum to keep your body in good health, because we shouldn't project onto everyone that everyone should do this. If you're a musician and you don't really care about being muscly, you just need to make sure that because you play an instrument that has a dissymmetrical, it's not stance, but say you play guitar, you play like this, right? If you play harmonium, you play one hand like this, and you pump the other one. Like, not everything is equal. So what happens is you build up in unsymmetrical patterns based on the stances or the positions that you use in your daily life. Even I'm sitting like this with my left arm like this. If you always do this with your mouse at work, then you have to learn how to use the opposite pattern, because you'll lose it otherwise. And that starts to cause pain in the body and dysfunction. And, this actually messes you up for life. So the most important thing is people have to figure out first, what do I want from my body? And if strength and ability is one of those things that you either need or want, then the next step is to open up your body into its full range of motion by doing something like yoga or Pilates or something like that, something that gives you control over your joints. And then once you've got good feeling and understanding of movement patterns, right, without weight, just basic movement patterns like body weight lunges and squats and other things like that, then push-ups and things, you sort of move into strength. But I wouldn't consider body weight lunges a strength exercise. It's actually just something you should be able to do if you want to walk up the stairs without having a problem. Like, you need to be doing that as a very standard core, just for the sake of knowing how to use your body and keeping it healthy. But then, do you need to do 100 kilo lunges? No. That's a choice. And then, even so, how is that going to help you with what you actually want to do with your body? So if you want to be really good at jiu-jitsu, you don't necessarily need to do 100 kilo squats or 100 kilo lunges or whatever. So it's about first coming into your body and getting some kind of standard foundation of ability, movement, range, and strength in it. That's not overly impressive in any of those categories. You're not particularly fast, you're not particularly strong, not particularly mobile, you're not particularly anything, but you're an all-rounder in all those things. Then you choose, do I want to pump myself up in the gym for aesthetics? Or do I want to become strong, which actually means to minimize my weight and maximize the contractile ability of my muscles or body? Do I want to become skilled, which means to learn how to use patterns of the body at different speeds or at different things like that? Do I want to do handstands? So the goals get more and more specific. Somebody says, I want to do a handstand. All that means is they want to feel what it feels like to have enough control of their body to hold themselves upside down. But that doesn't necessarily mean they want to do calisthenics. That just means they want to know what it feels like to be on their hands upside down. You could also do yoga and achieve that. You could also just do the gym and just do handstands on the side. So I'm saying it's like, you can't really assume for anyone what step they need to take. The person needs to create a foundation in themselves, and then they need to build on that foundation to be able to learn and develop the skills and abilities they want from their body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was gonna chime in there. Looking back on your career now and all the people that you've worked with, if someone did come to you with a specific skill in mind, how would you address mobility concerns first, or would you address strength first?
Yeah,
or both. Mobility first. So you assess where they are mobility wise, and then you assess, okay, what mobility does this person need to achieve this skill? And then your first steps are, okay, making sure that the joints can actually go there safely. Yeah. That's the first step.
Because exactly. You're 100% right. Because the person comes to me and says, I want to achieve this position. So let's take handstand. It's a great example, right? Mm-hmm. If you can't stand upright in the position that you need to do a handstand, what's the point in going upside down? You're just adding complexity and difficulty to something you cannot even do standing on your feet. You can't even put your arms in a straight line aligned with your spine and your legs when you're standing up. You don't even have the control to do this. So what's the point? You think something magic is going to change when you go upside down. It's going to happen. Like, no. So
it makes it worse.
People come and they say, I've been doing this handstand for so long and I just can't do it. The first thing I say is just to satisfy their need to be seen. Everybody wants you to look at what they can do so far. And it also gives you a lot of clues. So they say, I want to do a handstand. And I say, have you done one before? And they'll either say yes or no. And whichever the answer is, it doesn't matter to me. I say, do one now then. And they'll be like, but I haven't done one before. And I'll say, do what you can do. Whatever the best is you can do. And they say, I'm too scared. And then I say, okay, if you're too scared, that's fine. Then we'll start right from the beginning. But if they say, I've done it before, this is what I can do, or they go like this and they walk around, or they go up and they hold it, but they're like this, or like this. Whatever they do, I'll look at it and I'll say, right, it looks like there's these problems with it. But let's not just take my eyes as an assumption. Let's assess the joints properly. And I'm going to prove and show to you how you do not have the requisite ability to create that position, even standing on your feet.
Yeah.
And then they'll say, okay, now I see why I need that. And they'll say, can't I just fix that by doing it more? And I say, that's not how it works, because there's something called compensation.
Yeah.
So when you try to do something and your joint's not capable, your body will just send it somewhere else, and then your back will bend or your leg will twist or something will compensate. And so I said, you can keep doing that and you will learn to balance like that. But then you're going to have a handstand that's crooked. And after 2 years, you're going to come back and say, I want to make it straight. And I'm going to say, well, now you have to undo 2 years of faulty conditioning and relearn it from the start. So why do that? Why bother? Just get it right from the start. So yeah,
Riki, if I can just chime in there, like you really nailed it on the head there, because this is what I think slowed down my cross progression so much, was because for the longest time I would always have a shoulder that would elevate a little bit more, just a little bit more, and under heavy loads, something is eventually going to give, and this is why I continued running into like elbow problems, shoulder problems, and it wasn't until I started working with like a proper gymnastics coach who's actually coached normal people to get iron crosses, this and that. And the difference in approach was like incredible. Like so much attention was paid to those little details. And as soon as that sort of asymmetry popped up at any level of that intensity, we drop it. We go, no, that's too intense for you right now. And that's the reason why your shoulder's starting to come up again. So it'll be like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You know what I mean? 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And then over time, you obviously get stronger, but then that asymmetry slowly also disappears. Because for me personally, I don't know if it's the same for you, but those asymmetries show up the most when the exercise is at the most intense for you. You know what I mean? That's where it shows up.
Yes. But
in my opinion.
That's how you, and totally agree with what you're saying. I just have a bit more to add to it. It's not a but really. It's that the way that you overcame that issue with your scap elevating. Your scap was elevating when your shoulder was in abduction, which is here. Yeah. But your scap probably also elevates when your arm's here or when your arm's here. And so the thing is, so the thing is,
it was literally like how I'm leaning now.
So it's a more comprehensive way to fix it, to actually take it as a mobility issue and fix the joint while the shoulder is in all directions. So that means not just dialing back the iron cross to more regressed abduction exercises, where we can keep the scap down. It means to actually teach this scap to be able to stay down no matter what this arm is doing, whether it's iron cross, whether it's handstand, whatever. And that needs isolated mobility attention, basically. But once that develops, then you go back to your cross and it will do what it needs to do, right? But it's not just there when you do overhead press and everything else. So I just think it's really, really important. And for me, it's just made a massive difference in how strong I am, because when there's symmetry and there's efficiency, so this is another example you'll understand. When you do, can you do a straight arm handstand press?
Yes, I can do a straddle press.
Just for the listeners, what is a straddle press?
When you put your hands on the floor, so you're standing, you bend over and put your hands on the floor, and then your legs just come up like this into a handstand. But your arms remain straight. You don't push or bend. That makes sense, Akash?
Yeah. So your legs, listen, your legs are like, Riki was using his hands to show, but your legs basically come from standing position and they move slowly into the top. Into
the air, with control. And then your arms stay straight while you do that. So it kind of looks like they're floating up. But when you do that, if you don't have a good forward fold or hamstring flexibility or posterior chain flexibility, you have to lean more forwards.
You planche.
In order to get your hips up and to get your legs up. And then and then it starts looking like a planche press. And that's what my first straddle handstand press used to look like. It used to look like a planche press because I was so strong in my arms, but so immobile in my hips that I just muscle it up, right? And then I was just like, so what happens is once your hips get up, you then have to bring your arms back to the center. So it doesn't actually end up looking like a press. It looks like a 2-bit movement, but it still counts as a press. So it's weird. But then I started stretching a lot more. And then what happened was I required less strength in my arms to get up, and my legs went up easier because I was more mobile. So basically just having more range made the strength move, which is something that is a strength move, it made it easier just by having more range. And I always compare this to people or explain it to people by saying, if you have a medieval catapult, and I have one as well, and we both have the same rock or the same weight of rock, if my catapult is longer than yours, my rock's going further than yours. Full stop. That's it. The lever. Yeah. So if I have a longer catapult than you and you use the same weight, my rock is going further than yours. Mine has more power. It's simply because I have more leverage. That's the key word, is leverage. So if you've got maximal leverage in your joints, which means active end range strength, it means to be able to use it in its longest range, then you can do calisthenics pretty easily. And you can develop that within a lot of different ways, you know. So, well, calisthenics does develop it in its own right. But it's quite specific. So when you hold these static positions in calisthenics, the amount of neural drive happening, you're squeezing so hard that everyone has farted doing something. Everyone's done it once before when they're trying to do something really hard and then they've just released some gas because, like, I'm saying that you're squeezing the hardest you can. You look constipated a lot of the time when you're trying to do these hard moves. Imagine how hard your nervous system and your muscles are squeezing, and you're repeating that time and time again. That's creating a very strong neural groove and neural pattern. And like I said, if you do that wrong, then you're going to learn that. You're going to have to unlearn that in order to change it. But it's very stubborn to change when it's been implanted so deeply with so much tension and strength. And calisthenics being such a strength-based thing, you have to stretch and do mobility work as prehab and as mitigation of the strength work, because if you don't, you'll just get really stiff and then you'll just be this big hard ball of muscle that can't move and you'll have a lot of pain. So it's like everyone should have a strength discipline and everyone should have you could call it a yin or a passive discipline. whereby they open up their body and stretch and relax. You know what I mean? So as much as you want to train, you've got to be able to untrain as well. You've got to learn how to detrain.
Yeah, I really like that. And how would you approach stretching for the general population?
I'm obviously going to say yoga because it's just the most comprehensive, ancient, and, in my opinion, efficient method. So I could say to you here, Akash, here's 10 stretches. I'm a physio. Here's 10 stretches for your problem. You go and do those. That's fine because they're specific to you, right? But those stretches might be one on the floor, one sitting on the couch, one on the ceiling. You know what I mean? So you have to get up and down and twist around and pick this up and do that to finish your program. Where yogas means stand in one place and moving this way, and everything gets done very efficiently because it all leads into the next thing very smoothly.
Do you think someone who doesn't have a strong base in strength or doesn't have a strong base in mobility can get the most out of yoga?
There is a barrier, but the good thing about yoga is you get better at it just by doing it. But see, this is the thing. Yoga was not intended as physical development in the sense of how we look at it in the West. It wasn't meant for physical performance. It was meant to bring enough comfort and relaxation and openness to the body that you can sit and meditate for a long time without your body distracting you.
Yeah.
So that's all it was for, is to be able to sit still. So putting your foot behind your head, standing up, has nothing to do with meditating. So it's not a requirement. It's just a very high level of yoga. So the thing is, if you have a lack of shoulder mobility, let's say, and you try to do a downwards dog, what happens is the other parts of your body, like your knees and your pelvis and your spine, will compensate for the lack of ability in the shoulder to give you a down dog that it's not going to look perfect, right? But it's not going to look the exact shape you need, but your body will find a way to try to make the shape. And every time you do that position, you're not working into the joint that needs work. You're allowing the compensation to help you create the position. You following what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Is that simple enough explained if I say it like that? So if you want to fix the shoulder issue, you can't fix it by doing a compound movement that allows you to compensate. You have to go away from that movement and force yourself to work the shoulder without compensation, because that forces the joint to adapt. That's called mobility training. Once you have the requisite mobility to do the down dog or just off it, then you can use down dog and practice it. But so yoga cannot actually fix isolated mobility issues.
I think yoga expresses your current mobility.
Yeah, and it pushes on that because it's more to do with fascial lines. This gets increasingly complex depending on how deep we talk about this. But muscles don't work in isolation; they work in tandem with other muscles, and actually, they don't even work in tandem with other muscles. They work according to what the fascial lines and neural grooving tells them to do. So if you're used to using a line of tension from the back of your neck to the ankle of your foot that runs down your back, so when you bend over, there's going to be a particular line of tension through your body from the back of your neck to your heel. And there's ones that cross over your body like this. There's a good book called Anatomy Trains that talks about this.
Right. Is that Thomas Myers or?
Thomas Myers, exactly. So what this guy did, Thomas Myers, everybody used to cross-section the body like this. And then they'd look in this way. So they'd cut the arm at the elbow or something like that. And then they'd look at all the layers. They'd say, oh, you've got skin. And then there's some cling film stuff, fascia. And then there's muscle. And then there's bone, right? And this and this and this. But what Thomas Myers did, he just peeled the skin off a dead body. And he said, what's underneath that? And it was just like cling film. And then he he pulled on the shoulder like this. He pulled the cling film, and the foot started moving like this. Right? So he said, there's something that connects this tissue all the way to the foot. But when I pull it here, the foot moves. Right? So this fascia actually determines all of movement and structure. And the muscle will simply support what the fascial memory has. So the fascia can hold memory like water does. So you can train it to hold memory of positions. And then what happens is that's the default line of tension you're going to use when you bend in a certain position or posture. And then the muscles can actually be adapted in that same fascial line. And it's quite complex what I'm saying, but so if you bend over...
Because fundamentally though, you can't separate the two, right? Muscle and fascia, they all sort of work together, right? If you're stretching fascial lines, you're also going to be stretching and molding muscles to a certain position too.
Yes, but the fascia is much more stubborn to change. And so if you've got a fascial line running in a certain direction and you're bending over is a good example. You can bend over with your abs loose, or you can bend over with your abs on, right? But the same fascial line is being used. So you can actually change which muscles you decide to use, but the amount of range and the kind of line of tension that's going across your body, the biotensegrity, that's more fixed because it's based on pattern and years of memory. And it can be changed as well, but it's very hard.
Over time.
Much harder to change. And it's got a lot more. So the nerves, the neural grooving, the motor paths, that also happens along those lines of tension with the fascia. It doesn't happen on an isolated basis. It happens in the way that we move. And the fascia kind of guides that with the structure. So I say to people, if you imagine a tent, we talk about an individual joint like your shoulder, which is ball and socket. And let's say you have a tent. Everyone's been camping before, right? When you put a tent up, it's not held up by the sticks that go inside the tent. It's held up by the strings that you pull to the side and hit in the ground. So if you have all these strings going around the outside of a tent, if you pull some of the strings on one side tighter or longer, the whole structure of the tent's going to shift over to the side. And it's going to stay like that until you address the balance of tension in the strings. So when you use muscles means I can adapt and move the shape of the tent, but when I let go, the strings are still holding it in that way. You see what I mean? So the tent itself is malleable.
Yeah.
The holding up of the tent is set. Does that make sense? And then if I change the setting of the structure of the tent, that changes what I can do with the shape of the tent itself.
I see what you mean. And would you say that this analogy then relates to yoga being that tent overall? Yeah.
So the yoga actually allows you to release and redefine the fascial line.
So I think that is a really good way to explain. I think yoga is a great way to establish global flexibility and mobility. But from what I've seen, many people who are very proficient in yoga, or then they come to like a handstand class or they come to a strength class, they can't express that flexibility, if that makes sense. So they have amazing passive mobility, like, people can sit in lotus, they can maybe sit in some sort of pancake, but you ask them to slide from standing into a split, they can get to halfway and go, fuck that, I'm out. So from my perspective and from what I've seen, I personally don't feel yoga does much from like an active flexibility perspective for certain skills, but I think it definitely gives a lot of people a really good base. And I think the real benefits from yoga does come from just, overall relaxation, overall parasympathetic tone, all that good stuff, I think comes from yoga. But I don't think that the flexibility that you attain there passively translates to like being able to express that flexibility in skills, like a press handstand, for example.
Yeah, it doesn't at all. But you need it to be able to access it in the first place.
True.
So this is the thing.
Right?
So everybody's passive flexibility is always lagging behind their active. It's like a circle inside a circle.
Do you think it's the other way around? You think it's people lack the passive and not the active?
No, because I'm saying if I lift your leg in the air,
that's
as
passive.
high as it can go in passive, when I let it go, you can't hold it there. It will always be less.
So the active flexibility is always less than the passive.
Yeah, it's lagging behind the passive.
I think you said the other way around. That makes sense. All good. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So, but the thing is, rather than refer to it as passive flexibility, I think it's better to refer to it as capacity.
Yeah, I was about to say potential.
Potential.
So, Riki, what sort of yoga would one sort of explore at the beginning? Because there's that minefield of all the different types of yoga. Obviously, the true sense of yoga for what it was meant to be, and now the commercial sense of yoga, where there's a different type of yoga class going on every hour a day. How do you take your first step into yoga and exploring your flexibility in the truest sense of what it was meant to be?
Yeah, so my really honest advice is, if you want to learn yoga for the spiritual yoga, don't do yoga as it's done in the West. Just don't do it. Just actually go and learn about Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and the Vedic religions, and learn about how yoga is used as a tool to achieve spirituality within those contexts. And do not start with asana, because you'll get lost in a minefield of ballet, performance, Pilates, and a whole load of nonsense. So if you actually want to learn yoga for what yoga is, don't go to a yoga class. Actually, go and do some studying about what yoga is a tool for, and learn the philosophies of those kinds of ways of thinking from the East. And then you'll realize yoga is a tool to help you on that journey. Right? Then you'll approach it the right way. But if you want to use yoga as a physical performance thing, it's simply a massive library of bases, positions to help you explore and come into your body and expand your range of motion. And then what we were talking about just now with Ivan was the difference between range that you can control and range that you can't, because that's important when it comes to performance. But yoga is not performance, so we don't even have that conversation. It doesn't matter to them. So when Ivan says you can't slide in the middle split all the way down, there would be some yogis that can, because there are different styles of yoga and there's different movements in them that train different things. So there's certain ones where but they still wouldn't be as good as a ballet performer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
and it's not the point, though. Yeah, it's not the point.
Their foot in the air like this without even holding it.
Yeah.
But a yogi can't do that. A yogi would do that by holding their foot. But at the same time, a real yogi doesn't care about holding their foot in the air.
Exactly.
So this is the point. Yeah. So just yoga as a physical practice, just if you want to do it as a physical practice, the easier version is hatha, which is staying in positions for a longer time. The therapeutic ones are yin, iyengar, and things like that help you relax, and you use a lot of props so you don't have to take all the stress of the positions. If you want to do something more flowy, because you've already established good control of multiple positions with hatha. So you could say you start therapeutically with iyengar or yin, which just gives you a lot of time to just relax and let your nervous system come down, and your vagal, parasympathetic tone and all this stuff, allow your muscles to open and your joints to open. And then you start to try to create postures, which is hatha yoga. Then you try to sequence those postures together, which is vinyasa yoga. Then if you get really good at doing that and you want to introduce strength, then you do ashtanga yoga. And then if you want to get all fancy, then you go and do rocket or all these other new ones that they're making. But that is not in the spirit of what yoga is. So if you're doing it performance-wise, go through that route from the therapeutic yogas through to the flowing yogas and the strength yogas. But if you're doing it for spirituality, stay away from all of it and just do the therapeutic and posture-based ones, enough for you to be able to sit comfortably and get past that stage as quick as you can, because what you need to move to is breath work and meditation. That's real yoga, really. The other stuff is just a prelude. So it's like, you know, like we're saying here, I want to do a handstand. And somebody says, well, if you want to do a handstand, first you have to do mobility. And first you have to do this. So then someone says, I want to become enlightened in my own belief system. Then I say, well, first you have to do a little bit of stretching. But don't get stuck doing stretching. Don't get stuck doing mobility because your goal is handstand, right? You only need a certain level of mobility. Once you have it, get on with your handstand. You only need a certain amount of yoga stretching. Once you can do it, do your breath work and meditation. So it depends on the context.
Love that.
You wrote a book on the 7 levels of yoga, right?
That is Ashtanga, yeah. That is Ashtanga yoga.
What did you explore in that? Go on.
Oh, so I called it 7 paths. So the Ashtanga yoga is 8. That's what Ashtanga means. But you, which do you want me to go into? My book or Ashtanga?
Go into your book.
Okay, so in my book, I presented what Ashtanga yoga is as the real form of yoga, which includes 8 pillars or paths, right? One of those is stretching. That's the third one. Then it goes on to breath work, sense withdrawal, concentration, meditation, bliss state, and other things. These are all individual stages of discipline and progress. And then what my book was about was saying that actually yoga and meditation and other things are expanded outside of just the yogic way of doing it. So the yogic way of doing it is to sit there and breathe and meditate because it's a very pure way of meditating because it's just literally doing it. But movement itself is also meditation. Playing an instrument and doing things with sound, that's called nada yoga. So you can reach this enlightenment or you can reach this level of understanding or intuition or connection with divine or whatever you want to call it. You can reach that through the sound. But you can also reach it through bhakti, which is devotional service. And you can also reach it through dharma, which is doing the right thing and being a principled person. And so these are all yogas from India. But so even so we've got this Western concept of yoga, which is very, very small, which is stretching. And slowly, that people are trying to rip that open to show it's more than that. Actually, it's an 8-fold system, which includes breath work and meditation. And now, even so, we're trying to say, actually, that's not all of yoga. That's one type of yoga. That's Raja yoga, which means king or queen yoga. It means the yoga of sovereignty, the yoga of the self. But that is not bhakti yoga, dharma yoga, nada yoga, and all these other yogas. So all of these routes are valid routes to express oneself, find oneself, and find their connection with the divine. And all of that is yoga. And what my book was trying to give was, one, a thorough account of the origins of yoga and what it actually is from a Raja yoga perspective. So to stop people thinking it's just stretching and to realize it's actually part of a big thing called Raja yoga. And then to expand on the fact that Raja yoga is actually part of a series of different yogas and that yoga itself just means connection. So drawing it back into the spiritual dimension, really, and giving people tools and understandings of how they can be doing yoga without having to go to do a stretching class. You know what I mean? So working with your energy, for example, you know what I mean? Or like just being in nature, just doing certain things that bring us back to who we are and how we are supposed to live harmoniously. And then there's all the, you know, if you're stiff in your body, I think it was Patabi Joyce who said this, body is not stiff, mind is stiff. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, who's holding the tension? Why is the tension there? It's you. You're telling me that a muscle can squeeze of its own volition. No. It needs a signal. It needs something to tell it contract. But what is telling it to contract? Your subconscious. you're holding it like this, even though you're not even consciously aware you're doing it. If I tell you lie on the floor right now and let go of everything, you'll notice you're clenching your asshole, or you're clenching your teeth, or you're holding your legs slightly tense. But over time, when you sleep, your body slowly lets go of all of that. And as Paramahansa Yogananda said, the sleeping man becomes a yogi by default because he disconnects from the mind and from the body. But the thing is, when you're not conscious and you're sleeping, you can't do anything in that space. You can't make use of it. So you're being a yogi, but you're not able to use it consciously. But if you sit and meditate, you can go into that same state as when you sleep, but you're conscious. And then you can use it for healing purposes, for trauma resolve and other things like that. So the thing is, all the tension you're holding in your body is there because you are holding it. And you can try to get rid of it by using external methods, by going through the body. So if you stretch the body, then the mind becomes relaxed after, right? But then the mind becomes tense again because the subconscious mind is holding trauma, which feeds it back to the body. So it's just an endless loop. So the point is, you got to find that trauma and overcome it, and that will stop you. You know, there's like if you were ever hit when you were a kid for doing something naughty, or if you're ever beaten up when you were younger. So a lot of people flinch when someone does something like this to them, right? Sort of moves to them quickly. They flinch and they might, you ever see like a big bodybuilder or someone that looks really tough, and then a mouse comes and they go, like this. And then their leg cocks up to the side like that. You know this position that people do when they're scared? They're doing their leg cocks up to the side and their hands go up. That's a defensive fetal position. And it's based on a trauma loop of, my body, right? But someone that doesn't have that fear in them doesn't do that. They don't have that reaction. And so their nervous system and their muscles don't tense that way. And they just stand there and they're ready to take whatever's coming, or they go into a fighting posture. So their hands go up like this, or their arm comes out like this straight away in a punch. While other people would defend themselves. And it's all, so the way you use your body subconsciously, you can change that as well. You can actually set your response to external stimuli, but we're so under the control of the subconscious. Carl Jung said that, I don't know exactly the quote, but it's something along the lines of, until you take control of your subconscious, it will control your life in every way, and you will call it fate.
Yeah.
So you'll think that this is just what's happening, but actually, no, you are making it happen that way, but you just don't have control of it. So yeah, yoga is very deep. It goes very deep like that. And so like having the stillness of mind and calm and collectiveness to be able to spot a punch coming and slip it in boxing, that requires some trauma resolve. But equally, being able to have the focus and concentration to stay in a handstand for more than a minute also is meditative, because a lot of people can't focus on one thing for more than 10 seconds. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's does that answer what you asked me, Akash?
Yeah, I guess basically.
I ramble a lot, man. There's so much to say. So I don't really know.
Don't go to your local yoga class.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know it sounds silly. I'm saying if you want to know real yoga, don't go to your local yoga class. If you want to open up your body and stretch, then do go to it. But don't expect that you're going to get too much philosophy from there at all. You're not.
When I went to Bali, I did some really good yoga classes there.
Oh, yeah.
Which involved more philosophy and spirituality. There's a complete difference to the way they do it in the West, for sure.
Well, then I won't ramble about this too much, but just to make a point on that. So I teach philosophy lectures and sessions to the different teachers of different schools. So like Hot Pod Yoga. I used to teach for Yoga London, but they've closed down now. So they did all the yoga certifications. And what strikes me is that the philosophy is not a huge part of what's taught in these 4-week courses that qualify people to become yoga. The craziest thing is, right? 50 years ago, if you went to India and claimed that you're a yoga teacher, the people would look at you like, what are you talking about? You're not a yogi. You're wearing Adidas. The fuck are you talking about? You live in society. Yogi is someone that lives in seclusion and has nothing. It's a hermit. It's a ascetic. That's what a yogi is. It's impossible to be a proper yogi in society. You just cannot do it. Even in Bhagavad Gita and everywhere else that talks about this. It's not possible to even do it in this age, apparently, in this Kali Yuga. But we won't go into that. What I'm saying is, if you teach yoga, so you've got breath work and meditation, right? Ivan, have you done those, breath work and meditation?
I wouldn't say I've technically done those things, but I do a lot of activities that put me in those states. So for example, you mentioned the handstand stuff. Like I can completely relate. Like that level of focus or that level of meditative, that zoning in that you get on like certain skills and especially handstands. But even I also get that feeling with a lot of aerobic work. Like I do a lot of cycling, and I find that really puts me in a fantastic meditative state. You know what I mean? Right. So I don't technically do those things, but I do. I guess I do in my own way. You know?
Yeah. So here's the thing. People go into that state, right? A meditative state, doing different things. Now, my point is, you can give anybody a series of breathwork programs, or you can teach them how to meditate. But it's like when you lead someone to the edge of the cliff of this material world, and they're standing on the edge, and they're looking down the cliff, and all there is black. So you brought them to this space where there is nothingness, and they're in the space of meditation. That's called the ocean of nescience. It means an ocean that cannot be touched with science. It has to be reasoned to and thought about, right? Which is the distance between us and the divine. So there's a limit on this universe that we can touch and understand. And then from that limit to the absolute divine, there's a gap. And that's called ocean of nescience. And
that's cool.
That's where you float. That's where you get to when you meditate.
Void.
But if you don't have philosophy.
Void, yeah.
Yeah, void. But you could call it void. That's one philosophy. You can call it void, right? But my point is, if you don't have a philosophy to give someone of what to do when they're in that state, they cannot use it productively. You're just sitting in it. It means you're lost. It means I've got somewhere to a destination I've not been before, and there's a whole ocean of nescience I don't understand, and I don't know how to navigate it, and you've brought me here, and now you just left me here and ran away. So it's like being walked on a path to a place of black and void, and then the person disappears. That's what a meditation teacher does when they sit you down and make you meditate, and you get to this space and you say, yeah, I feel it. I'm here. Like, but what is this place? Where am I? What do I do here? How is this relevant to my life? Where am I from? And all these questions start coming. And the yoga teacher doesn't have anything to give because they're not a spiritual teacher. They're not a philosopher. They're a stretching teacher. Does that make sense? So like there's a big gap between teaching spiritual philosophy. I'm not saying you have to teach a particular one. Even if you want to teach someone atheism, that's fine. I'm not preaching against any one or the other, right? If you want to teach Zen Buddhism, they have very different ways of coping mechanisms, very different worldviews, ways of looking at suffering and how to accept suffering and to be detached from the world, right? This is very different to the Hindu viewpoint that detachment is not the answer. You must act because you're here. And that there is dharma to be done, which is what is righteous. And that there is life after death. There is consciousness after death, at least. And that there is a super consciousness. These concepts are all outside of Buddhism. They don't exist in Buddhism. So if you want to help someone move towards fixing deeper issues that resolve around trauma, suffering, worldviews and things like that, you've got to use the meditative space to work with those things, right? So it's the same as hypnotism and psychology. But psychologist attempts to do it from the level of mind. But yoga attempts to do it from the level of intuition and understanding and higher self, or spirit. Right? So because the psychologists can't talk about spirit, they can, but as in like it's not part of their field because it's ocean of nescience, right? So they can only say, well, you're suffering because you're allowing yourself, your brain is making you suffer because you're seeing it this way. You've got to try and see it this way and try to use these tools that will help you somatically overcome your hormonal this and this, right? But like, there's no deeper meaning or reason to life in that. Does that make sense? You're just telling me how to help myself, but you're not helping me resolve my deepest questions on why I actually suffer. Why am I born to suffer? I'm not asking you how to end my suffering. I'm asking you, why do we even suffer in the first place? Why does it exist? And if I have to suffer, how am I supposed to accept that? It's so hard to accept it when I've done nothing wrong. Why should I suffer? These questions come, right? Why did my mum have to die at 20 or whatever it happened for these people, right? Things happen to people. My child died before it was born. Why did this happen to me? Psychology can't give people answers for that. But yoga somehow, depending whatever philosophy you give someone through it, it can help people with a lot of deeper stuff. So the problem is, so back to your thing, Akash, you said you went to Bali and you got a bit more spiritual stuff there. What they gave you were the tools that are associated with spiritual development. But I doubt they gave you any philosophy that actually helped you change the way you see the world. It maybe just helped you feel a bit better or gave you coping mechanisms. Psychologists can give you coping mechanisms. What do they tell you to do? Count to 10 and breathe very slowly. Isn't that pranayama? Aren't they just giving you their own version of breath work? It's somatic, isn't it? They know that breathing regulates the brain activity, right? Here's a really interesting. So the American Journal of Cardiorespiratory Medicine published a paper which says humming increases nitric oxide concentration in the lungs by 15 times. And now the relevance of that is nitric oxide is a gas that they give you in the hospital to calm you down. It calms parasympathetic tone, right? And this paper is saying that humming increases that by 15 times. Now, there is a breath in pranayama called Brahmari, which is where you breathe in and then you go, right? So in a way, they're validating an ancient technique by just having proved what it does scientifically. But it was already known that it worked thousands of years ago. And then they will say, well, that's just somatic. The only reason you're calming down is because nitrogen oxide is in more concentration in your lungs. And that seems to have an effect on the parasympathetic nervous system. It's all very glasses on and, oh, well, it does that, doesn't it? So we can observe that it does this, so it does this. The yogi will say to you, breath is of the element of air, and so is manas, the mind. And the breath is inextricably linked to the mind. So when we control the breath, the mind comes under control. And when the mind is not under control, the breath is neither under control. So when you look at Autobiography of a Yogi, which is a book by Paramahamsa Yogananda, and he says, the restless monkey breathes at a rate of 32 times a minute, man at an average of 18, but the giant tortoise who lives to an age of 300 years breathes only 4 times a minute. And he talks about the varying rates of breathing compared to states of consciousness. What happens when you're drawing something very accurately? You hold your breath when you're focusing. What happens when you're scared? You start breathing erratically. What happens when you come out of cold water? You hyperventilate. what happens when you're lusty and you have sex, your heart rate, your breathing starts to speed up, you're panting, right? So like your state of consciousness is absolutely linked to the pattern of your breath, like this. And it's because of the element of air and the other ways that the mind is of air, basically. That's what it's called. It's called the element of air, the mind. It changes direction. It does all this stuff. It's like air. The metabolism is like fire, right? The emotions are water because they ebb and flow. So the way that it's all described, it might sound metaphysical, but it's actually very, very insightful and very, very logical when it comes down to how they use their practices. But the difference is when we use metaphoric ways to talk about things like air and earth and things like this, it opens up the conversation to the bigger scheme of the cosmos. But talking about things just in terms of the concentration of NO2 in your lungs has this effect on your nervous system, that doesn't help you understand how you relate to the cosmos and how that all relates. Does that make sense? It's a very isolated way of looking at it, which is what science tends to do. It just tends to dissect things. But so if you, in Hinduism, it's said that the first element of all creation is sound, which is Om, right? That was the first thing that was created. So hear this logically. Let's say there's nothing, void, absolute nothing. And then consciousness awakens, right? Everything that consciousness is aware of becomes space, yeah? And then when this Om was spoken into that space, it created vibration, which is waves, right? And from the waves in the space and caused by the sound, the waves, that created the element of air. And from the friction in the air with the waves came fire and electricity. And from fire came cool parts and hot parts of the space, which created condensation because it created different levels of mass. So solid, liquid, gas are the same molecule with different space between them, right? So from fire came water. And when water solidifies, comes earth. So essentially the first element was sound and all the other elements came because of sound that happened in space. So when we've got this, you know what kirtan is?
Yeah.
You know what kirtan is, Ivan?
No.
It's chanting with musical instruments and mantras and sound.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
So the principle of kirtan is, why do you try to use your body to get back to the spiritual or divine experience or the transcendental experience when you can just use the first element that ever came into being, which was sound, and it will carry you all the way back? You see what I mean? Because sound is so pure. It's so pure. It has no language, but it can be understood by everyone. It's just what it is. It's just vibration. That's it. And if you hang on to that vibration, all fluctuations in your mind, body, and every other state, it gets lost because you get stuck on that line. And that line is so pure in its manifestation, it will take you right to the edge of the universe. But instead of doing that, we want to work with our bodies and then our emotions and then our energies and then our diets. And we want to work with the air in our mind and the psychology. And we're trying to work with inferior elements to reach the transcendental platform. But sound is the most, is the original element, the first one, and it's the most highest in terms of what touches the divine. It came straight from the divine first. And earth was the last thing to appear. So that's the principle of kirtan, and kirtan comes under what we call bhakti yoga, which is devotional service to the divine and everything else. So that's what I mean in the grand scheme of what yoga is. Don't go to a yoga class. That's what I mean. If you're looking for that.
Man, I didn't realize me asking you. So which class should you go to? We'll be talking about everything of nescience and over there.
Yeah.
So, Riki, how can people find out more about some of your teachings, your philosophy, some of your books, classes, and more about what you do?
I guess just my Instagram, really, Rick's Official, or you can just get my book, which is on Amazon, which is called New Age Yoga. I kind of regret calling it New Age Yoga now. I called it that because New Age is a term for like the scientific and somatic validation of ancient philosophy and stuff. But people are running with it far too far now. You know what I mean? And this New Age stuff has become a lot of other stuff that I just don't agree with because it falls outside of, what I'm trying to say is a lot of people in the West, this is myself included. I consider myself Western. I was born in London. I'm a British Indian, right? My culture is not just, I'm not a Desi. I'm a British person, but I have Indian ancestry and I know a lot about my culture and I'm connected to it, right? But I still speak British and I have British standards by, manners and the way I behave and what's acceptable in society and what's not, right? Things like that. I still have quite a British viewpoint because I was brought up here. But what it appears to me is that a lot of people in the West believe that they can concoct their own philosophy and own understanding of everything and preach it in that way. But the way I see things is if you don't adhere to a established tradition or philosophy from somewhere else, you're just making it up and you're really playing a dangerous game because the people that made up philosophies like Stoicism and Buddhism and whatever else, nihilism, all these different philosophies, these are the greatest minds that ever lived, that just sat there and discussed this their whole life, and they were philosophers and all this other stuff, right? And if you ask them any question about life, they have an answer that's congruent and consistent with the rest of their answers. And so they have a worldview that's consistent across everything, including how the cosmos was created and how you should approach suffering, how you should approach your fellow human, how you should approach animals and nature. Everything has been considered and there's an attitude towards all of it and it's consistent. But what people do now is pick and mix.
Mm.
So they take a quote from Zen Buddhism and say, I like that one. I'm going to live by that. But I also believe in God, or I don't believe in God. And it's like, but you can't follow Zen Buddhism if you believe in God, because Zen Buddhism does not believe in a God or the concept of God. So I don't think people understand that in order to follow a philosophy or to have a worldview that's consistent, you can have whatever worldviews you want, but to have one that's consistent, you have to follow a set of beliefs and ideals that match with what you feel is best. But you can't just make that up. You have to learn it from somebody who's thought about it, who's much more qualified than you. And when you read the things that they wrote, you'll feel like it's everything you believe in and you completely subscribe to it. Mm. But at least this person is smart enough to explain it, and it gives you guidance and it gives you kind of parameters to work within. So if you say, I believe in detachment as a principle, but I also believe in God, then Buddhism doesn't work for you. But if you say, I don't believe in work and I do believe in detachment, then Buddhism does work for you. If you say, I don't believe in God, but I don't believe in detachment, I believe in changing the world, then also Buddhism doesn't work for you. So why do you live your life by Buddhist quotes if you believe that the world should be changed? Because they don't. They believe you should just let it all happen and just disregard it. detach from it. It's an illusion. So it's like people have got to get it straight in their heads. What do you believe? And nobody sits there long enough to figure that out. Because the majority of people, when I ask them, what do you believe? They don't know. They say, I haven't thought about it. And then I ask them questions, and then we get into a spiritual chat, and they kind of get a bit closer to what they... And I never tried to preach. I tried to figure out what it is this person believes and makes most sense of. And then I say, well, that sounds like you'd probably like this philosopher, or you'd like this religion, or this book. Why don't you read that? And then that person will get to hear from someone more educated in their way of thinking how to cope with everything in life and how to see life in a way that is purposeful. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But I can't give you purpose. I don't know you. I don't know what you believe. I don't know what you care about. I can only preach my own version of purpose and everything else. And then what happens when you get teachers, yoga teachers or whatever, who don't even know their own purpose or their own beliefs, but they're teaching meditation? What are you teaching? It's just somatic. You know what I mean? But I'll equally say that that's not necessarily a bad thing, because there is a lot of work that can be done just within the somatic realms of healing, which in my personal beliefs can prepare you karmically to perhaps take on that spiritual journey in another life. So it might not be this lifetime that you're ready for it.
So you're saying if you prioritize your physical health and well-being, you'll be able to achieve higher enlightenment and divinity.
Yeah, but I'm saying they're preludes, aren't they? They're what give you this foundation structure to go that way.
Yeah, correct.
And somebody might not be ready to have philosophical thoughts and discussions in this lifetime. They might just need to actually realize the fact that they are eternal. Something in them is eternal.
Yeah.
And they might not even be ready for that. They might just need to have some practice at being able to use logic and rationality. Do you know what I mean? So it's like some people are just living in trauma all the time.
So they're the ones who should just go to a normal Western yoga class, right?
Yeah. So I'm saying, if you just want somatic healing, if you want somatic healing with nothing else, just go to a normal yoga class. But if you actually want to find some purpose and answers, if you've got questions and you want answers, you need to start looking at philosophy and different thinkers. Basically, you need to read what thinkers say.
Amazing. We'll check out. We'll put the links in the show notes for your books and for your Instagram for people to find out more. Just say a massive thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom. And let's hope people don't take this and think they're going to go to their next yoga class.
No, thanks for having me, man. Yeah, I told you I was doing this. I told you I'd way off the thing. This was a fitness podcast.
It's never a fitness podcast. That's great. Thank you so much, man.